Assembled entirely for the benefit of cameras in the summer of 1962 was a lineup of the Midland Railway's preserved engines, which were kept at Derby at this time. The event was the result of a decision to take official photographs of Kirtley 240 number 158A, the working 440 compound number 1000, the last surviving Tilbury tank Thundersley, and the Johnson single driver, or spinner, number 118. After they'd been photographed in Derby's yards, the compound shunted them to prepare for a journey to Wirksworth, the branch terminus always having been used as the official photographic location for the Midland Railway. The final locomotive in the lineup was the spinner. These single driving axle locomotives were an anachronistic product of Midland design practice in the late 19th century. As trains had grown heavier and technology had improved, the small single driver had been phased out on almost all railways. However, there was still a school of thought that a single driving axle could produce greater speed, as coupling rods might restrict the freedom of the wheels to rotate at higher speeds, justified to some extent at a time when tolerances were not as tight as they became later. This fear was normally outweighed by the advantage in adhesion that could be obtained by having the power transmitted through more than one axle, and the improved starting ability made up any time lost through lower top speeds. The invention of steam sanding had given the single driver a new lease of life, as it meant that starting adhesion could be improved whilst retaining the freedom of movement at high speeds. At Duffield Junction for the Wirksworth branch, Pat Whitehouse signed his autograph for young enthusiasts and Railway Roundabout viewers. The train then set off down the branch with the compound leading as before. The first and last engines in the cavalcade represented the two final generations of Midland Express locomotives. The Midland Railway became the leading advocate of single drivers, and the Johnson singles had a brief reign as the top express power in the 1890s. This fitted in well with the Midland's policy of short, frequent and fast trains. However, even the Midland stock grew heavier, and the spinners were soon outclassed, being phased out in the first decade of the 20th century, replaced by the compounds and the smaller 440s. Most went then, and all had gone by the First World War, except number 118, retained for preservation, one of the earliest examples of a railway preserving its locomotives. The Johnson single was a later design than the small 240 number 158A, which was built to the order of his predecessor Matthew Kirtley. These little engines were quite up with practice on other railways when they were introduced in the 1860s and 1870s. The other engine in green livery was not of Midland origin, but was the product of a Midland subsidiary, the London, Tilbury and Southend Railway. This was an outer London commuter railway on which a series of 442 tank engine designs had operated all services since the 1890s. The preserved engine Thundersley was one of the second series, built in 1909. Replaced on their native metals in the 1930s by larger Stanier designs, they'd found a useful role on former Midland branches until the 1950s when all were withdrawn, with the exception of number 80, which was restored in 1956 to take part in the LTSR centenary celebrations. That was the only time she ever steamed after preservation. News of the presence of the television cameras had got out of Wirksworth, and the local schoolchildren were allowed along to the station to see both the locomotives and the filming. Nothing changes. Hey, Mum, look at me. I'm on the telly. The locomotives were lined up alongside the platform for the children to examine, the station still being in existence despite having closed to passengers as early as the 1st of January 1947, a year before nationalisation. The locomotives were then shunted into the yard for the photographic session. Of course, the sun went in there. However, after waiting patiently, it returned to give this magnificent lineup for the official photographers.